Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. As part of the year-ender series, The Big Picture has been looking at various aspects of what has happened in India during the year 2014. Today we look at the role of the private sector in the country's economy. Ever since the liberalization process started in 1991, the role of private sector in the economy has been growing very significantly. As the size of the private sector has grown, so has the size of the economy. But has the private sector fulfilled its potential? What are the lacunae both at the government policy level as well as its own abilities to grow, which has hampered the growth? We have also been discussing the menace of crony capitalism and its effects. How has this helped or hampered the economy? What about the huge corporate debt burden? During the year gone by, how has the private sector helped in the growth of the economy? With the change in government during the year, what have been the changes at the policy level which will help or harm the private sector? We will look at all this today with Dr. Swamy, a distinguished economist and a BJP leader, Ajay, former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India, Mohan, Guruswamy, economist and chairman at the Center for Policy Alternatives, and Vivian Fernandes, senior business journalist. Welcome to all of you. Dr. Swamy, before the elections, at the beginning of this year, there was a lot of problem about the economy. There was allegations of crony capitalism. Everybody was saying that once the elections are over, a new government comes in, things will change. You think things have changed for the private sector?
Well, the private sector's main grouse, from what I have come to learn, which is the way they feel that things are actually a little worse than before, is this high interest rates, which of course really is not directly concerned with the power of the government. It's the Reserve Bank, which is supposed to be autonomous. That is because the private sector naturally would depend on it. But in that, when I talk about private sector, my concern is more the medium and small industries, because they are the ones who provide the bulk of the employment. And if they flourish, the employment, particularly of the semi-skilled, would be greatly enhanced, and the unemployment rate would come down. So it's things have changed in one respect, that there is today even an acknowledgement by the Transparency International that we are less corrupt than before. But I think the main problem would be how to see that the cost of capital goes down for the medium and small industries.
So that is your major concern?
That is, I think, the major concern. That should be the major concern.
Mohan, would you agree with that?
Generally, yes. I'm very rare. I'm in agreement with Dr. Swamy, but I'm in disagreement with that corruption has become less. The GFI figure is a 2012 figure, and it says the total black money abroad is 484 billion. In India itself, the Institute of Public Finance has said that the black economy is equal to 75% of GDP, which is today $2 trillion.
Anyway,
so so it's not. There's no.
No, that is not the major issue here. The issue is
the issue is that private sector has a high political role in policy making, without the same economic investment in the country. The private sector, all said and done, is still smaller in terms of investment than the public sector. So if you have to get this economy growing, you have to reform the public sector first. You've got to make the public sector profitable. You've got to unfetter the public sector and take the public sector into the consultative process. For instance, the minister will now start having meetings of industry. So there will be no public sector man there. And all of them, the top 10 of them, are bigger than the private sector companies.
No, anyway, that is a separate debate itself, how the public sector has been
ignored. So the public sector, there's no reason for the private sector to be any more happy than before.
The question is that at the beginning of the year, there was this huge depression among the private sector, thinking that the government has not done anything for them. You think at the end of the year, they should be happier?
No, I don't think so. I think the depression has not lifted. Matter of fact, the growth figures are showing that. The industrial production index has come down, and the GDP has slowed down. Tax collection has slowed down. Everything is slowed down. So how can it be better?
So who is responsible for it?
Well, I don't think a particular government can be ascribed responsibility. It's a continuous process. But in our politics, from the day you start, you're responsible. So, you know, I don't think this government has shown any initiative to tackle this or any vision to tackle this. It is continuing the same old way. Look at the budget. It's no different from last year's budget or February's budget. It could have been done by Chidambaram again. So these kind of things are continuing. So there's no breakout from the morass we find ourselves in. There's the investment to GDP ratio is still coming down. The savings ratio is coming down. So everything is down. Our government, except for lots of programs being announced and not taking off and not having money, nothing seems to be happening.
Vivian?
You asked about potential of the private sector.
The potential of the
whether
private
it is
sector.
fulfilled it or
And
not.
what, no, we have to, apart from what both Mohan and Dr. Swamy has said, the fact is that the role of private sector, because we are talking of what problems they have. What is the problem they have?
See, the problem of the private sector is that this is not a very easy country to do business in. And this affects not only the big corporates, but mainly the small and medium enterprises, which creates the bulk of jobs, as Dr. Subramanian and Swamy mentioned. So when you make conditions easier to do business in, it is the job-creating sectors that will benefit the most. You asked about the potential of the private sector, and I think ever since liberalization, the private sector has expanded. Let's not talk about investment, but what investment produces. So if you look at the private sector's share in manufacturing, only in manufacturing, it has nearly doubled from 7.7% at the beginning of liberalization in the 1990s to 12.5% now. Whereas that of the public sector's share of GDP, public sector manufacturing companies, their share of GDP has more or less remained the same. It was 7% at the time of liberalization. It's about 6.3% now. Even in terms of share of organized sector employment, and this is not a very big number in the overall employment thing, we find that while the public sector continues to employ more in the organized sector, the share has come down to about 17.5 million, whereas that of the private sector has actually risen from about 8 million to 11.5 million. What I find, what we are concerned here is about how productive that investment
Exactly.
is. And if you look at one metric or one measure, see, the Bombay Stock Exchange has an index called the BSE PSU index, and the price earning multiple is a measure of the competence of the management. And if you look at the kind of multiple that the investors give to PSUs, it's about 11%. It's 11 times the total number of shares. I mean, the value is about 11 times the earnings. Whereas that of the Sensex stocks, which have about 30 companies, including some public companies, but most of them are not public sector, most of them are private sector. If you look at the price earning multiple, it is 18. So, the earnings are discounted 18 times for the Sensex companies, whereas for the public sector companies, it's 11 times. So if you look at it, the investors assign a higher kind of value for private sector managements than public sector managements. And the public sector normally thrives in areas where there is administered pricing or where there's no competition. And in fact, I would say that if there is crony capitalism in this country, it is because of the broken politics. Because politics in this country has become an activity which has got the highest rate of return on investment. Unlike any other sector. I'm talking about the successful ones.
I don't know whether Dr. Swamy will agree with that.
I'm talking about the successful ones. I do not know whether...
Not for all, but yes, if you decide to maximize your rate of return, if that's your politics, yes, it is so.
And
but there are people who don't think in those terms.
Okay.
I think there's one point I'd like to make on what Vivian said. You see, private sector shares are higher because a lot of the shares are ramped up by the owners themselves, who trade in the shares actively. And time and again, these fellows get caught. And nothing happens, they're back in the market again. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Dua, the question is this, that, you must have heard all the other panelists, so at least some of them, what they said. My question to you is that, the private sector, how much does it contribute to the, has it lived up to its potential in the last year, especially the change of governments? Do you see any change in their approach towards business, in their approach towards investments?
I think so. There is a very clear change in their confidence, their perception. The Indian businessmen has in the last few months, in fact, I would say almost a year in anticipation of the change in government itself, had started becoming far more confident about the future. They had become optimistic, and many of them had started about reviving their investments, which they had kept on hold for the last few years. However, on the ground, I think they are still waiting and watching. I don't see the investment rate having been stepped up. Domestic investment rate, private investment rate, so far, probably they are still waiting for a few more things to happen.
Okay. Dr. Swamy, why do you think they're waiting?
Well, some delegations of the private sector have already met me in connection with what should be in the budget, so on. But the single most important thing they say is the rate of interest that they face and the difficulty in getting capital. That's the real focus that needs to be done, because these are people, I'm talking about the medium and small industries, they can look after themselves, they're good at marketing, they know how to make the sales, but where they are hampered by is the fact that there's uncertainty, there's difficulty in getting the capital that they want for planning for the future.
But the fact is that when we talk of investments, if you look at the coming to the issue of non-performing assets of the banks,
yes,
it is the corporate debt burden has grown, and still they keep saying that we have not.
The big guys are responsible, and they have the influence to see that seizures don't take place, attachments don't take place. The medium and small industry is, in fact, if you look at the disaggregated data, their contribution to the NPA is very small.
Mohan? Yeah.
And there also I would
I'll
say,
continue.
Girish, I would say that even when it comes to NPAs, one of the reasons why we have such high NPAs is because of the predominant share of the public sector, and the public sector banks have got very little accountability. In fact, the total, NPAs of the public sector, according to a reply given in the Lok Sabha in November this year, was 2,41,000 crore rupees, whereas the amount recovered by the debt recovery tribunals was about 30,000 crore. 13% is the amount. The public sector has got a 70% share of the banking sector, whereas the private sector has got a 30% share. And you look at the NPAs of the private sector, it's about 26,500 crore, which is about 10% of the rate of the public sector. This is the kind of collusion that happens. You look at the highway sector. The National Highways Authority says this is the kind of investment that should go. The banks inflate it. Then they give loans to the highway developers at that inflated cost projections. The private developer has got no skin on the project. If it goes bankrupt, it just shuts it, and moves away. This is what happened with Kingfisher Airlines. This is happening, in sector after sector. I would say one of the reasons why there's crony capitalism is because of crony socialism.
Mohan, would you agree with that?
I would agree with there's no problem with this formulation. Fact is that, banks today are horribly inefficient. All Indian banks, public sector, private sector, operate on a margin of, on a spread of about 6%. That's between the lending rate and the borrowing rate, And they're all highly inefficient, highly burdened with staff.
No, especially the public sector banks.
Particularly the public sector banks and the private sector.
The reason why they have got such high margins is because of the private sector inefficiency, which is being capitalized by the private sector.
Citibank makes more profits than some of our bigger banks.
Right.
Okay? So that is one. Second thing is this bureaucratic control. Now what happens is that instead of banks competing with each other to lend to good customers, there's a thing called the Bankers Club in Bombay. There is. Actually, they all sit and they distribute the loans.
Right.
Saying, okay, you take so much, you take so much. And they are funding these companies. And the instructions and the directions who to fund goes from Delhi. Because, so what we've done is taken out industrial licensing. Now we have created allocations in capital. So that's why everybody hangs around Delhi. They are, and that's the nexus between politics and business takes place there. So, first you got to break up that Bombay consortium. where, IDBI, IFCI, ICICI, then all the big banks, State Bank, and all this sit together. They call it the Bankers Club. And they decide. So that has to be broken up because that is a monopolistic practice. And they don't compete with each other on lending. Then you got to aggressively recover. Now, you're talking about NPAs. Vivian said about a figure of 264 lakhs. Actually, the current figure is 475 lakhs.
474.75 lakh crores.
Non-profit. And the hard debt, the unrecoverables, is now 264.
And these banks don't force the promoters out of the company.
One important point. When these companies are all in line there, Anil Ambani, Adani, the Ruyas, GVK, GMR, all are there they call it restructuring. But no restructuring takes place. What really is happening is they want more money. When you restructure a company, when you restructure a business, you sell off some divisions, or you change the owners and things like that. You don't do anything of that sort. The same people continue.
In fact, Dr. Swamy, this is recently in the last week, the RBI has said that they are going to allow restructuring of loans and things like that. And these are the same people who will get the restructured loans without.
Yes, that's correct.
And no government, any change of government doesn't seem to matter.
Well, I can express my personal view. One of the biggest mistakes we have made, this new government, is to keep the same Reserve Bank governor, which was appointed by the previous government. Because I think he has a philosophical mind fix where he thinks that one way of curing a patient who has high temperatures to kill him. So this high interest rate thing that he has foisted has had a huge impact on our country.
But Dr. Swamy, that's high
This
interest.
is the high interest rate is a recent last.
But high interest rates are not the only
has been there forever.
Of course not. It's not the only problem.
So that is because your
but you see, the thing is that high interest rates, then abolition of income tax as we had originally been propagating and now it's not being considered. There are certain things we have to bring about a change in outlook.
So that is because that's because your government, sir, has not done much on the fiscal deficit front.
Yes,
and that is why the Reserve Bank governor is saying that you first show us results on the fiscal deficit front. We have had,
because I don't think interest rates have got anything to do with
I think I have disagreement. I think we've got the best person we can have as the RBI governor. He's a thorough professional, a thorough economist, understands things, and he's not used to volatile jumps, let's get rid of income tax and all that. He's steady and
anyway, it is not in his hand to get rid of income tax.
Absolutely, that's one. But you see, if you keep throwing more money at bad companies, just now, you see, Adani has got 23,000 crores as NPA. Now the State Bank is giving him $1 more billion to invest. This is the kind of nonsense.
Dr. Swamy, this is the problem, that the same people who have been shown very clearly to be, defaulters and things, they keep getting. So is it politics which is creating this kind of?
Yes, of course. They have a lot of influence amongst politicians. And you face that when you fight these corruption cases. I would say that DLF, the Ambanis, Shahid Balwas, all of them have a big say. And it takes a little... I'm hopeful that it can be done because I've seen certain things happen in this government which would not have happened in the previous government.
Oh, yes. No, one second. I think Mr. Dua wants to... Yes, Mr. Dua.
Yeah, I think we need to disaggregate these NPAs. Most of these happen to be in the infrastructure space, and of which electrical power and the fuel supply, some of these assets, the fuel assets in which investments have taken place, and then followed by highways. About highways, there's been a discussion. I think if we were to exclude these two segments of the economy, the bank exposure isn't very high. And to that, I think one of the reasons probably is the higher interest cost. But much more than the interest cost, because interest costs haven't risen very much in the last, say, till about 2 years ago. It was a perception that India is no longer a good place to do business in, invest here, that the people were holding back. And if now we are going to be restructuring the power loans, etc., the restructuring must go the whole way, which means If we have to change, there has to be foreclosure, there have to be sale of assets to new entrepreneurs, new promoters, etc. We must let that happen. It cannot be mere tinkering and restructuring only by way of a little bit of rescheduling, etc.
Restructuring is actually rescheduling.
Time we have done.
I have disagreement with Zoa on this because
yes, exactly what I'm saying. We mix up restructuring with rescheduling.
Absolutely.
That's not the way.
Okay.
We would need to change entrepreneurs. We would need to change promoters.
That doesn't seem to have happened except
certain loans, etc. Sell off those assets.
But if you look at the top, that doesn't seem to except in the case Satyam case. Which that happened. That was not actually. It was forced to happen.
No, but except in the top 10 debtors,
NPAs,
all are non-infrastructure companies.
I don't think
you got the biggest debtors are Diamond Trader, 7,000 crores, Kingfisher Airlines. Like that, you go down the list. The top 10 fellows who account for maybe 30-40% of the NPAs are non-infrastructure. Infrastructure companies are in trouble for other reasons because their buyers are in a bad shape. Okay, the electricity boards don't give their money in time, and they're all stuck and things like that. That's separate. But at least the asset is there. In some of these cases, the asset is not even there. The diamond company has disappeared. There's this steel company which has disappeared. All this open racketeering which takes place with the support of bureaucrats and politicians, which happens only in this particular country because the system is enmeshed like that.
Okay, Dr. Swamy, the question is this, and I want Vivian also, all of you, in fact, there is this general feeling that private sector is more efficient than public sector. Is that a reality?
Yes, I would say that on average that is correct, and you can go industry by industry, take FCI and the private trader, or it's not something that is true as a rule, but substantially it is true that when there is a private sector, they are more efficiently managed than public sector. Even in the airline business, you find Indigo will do much better than Air India.
But what happened to Kingfisher Airlines?
Well, Kingfisher Airline functioned like a public sector airline, I can tell you that.
And SpiceJet.
See, in India, the public sector is inefficient, but this is not the case everywhere in the world. You take the example of Singapore. They have got a sovereign wealth fund called Temasek, and they have got a holding company where all the public sector companies are under the control of that holding company, and they are answerable to the government only on profitability measures. In India, if you want to do this, and if our Prime Minister, who talks about minimum government, maximum governance, wants to restructure the public sector, this is the model to follow. You have a holding company, put all the public sector companies in that holding company, and make the holding company answerable to Parliament only on profitability measures, whether to make money or not.
No, but
to get rid of it won't happen. It won't happen.
No, it won't.
That is what should happen.
It's a separate debate altogether. But more, my question is this: we again. Corporate sector, the private sector, they are the solution to this country's economic problems. Is that the way you also look at it?
No. I don't think that they are the solution. They are a good part of the problem now.
And one more question.
Reform of the economy,
right.
Reform of how this economy is structured is the solution. You got to unfetter the market. You got to, stop these protections. You let the market take over, inefficiencies collapse and get shut down and go. So this kind of thing this new liberalized regime has to come. But if you don't do that and say that private sector will clean it up and so on, it's not going to happen.
When you say unfetter the economy, there has been a lot of unfettering in the last 20 years.
Not really, except for the abolition of industrial licensing at the one stroke and the dismantling of DGT. They will bear me out on that. Nothing else has happened. Banks are still controlled by the state.
The main problem I find is that this cartelization amongst the big industrialists. So the market forces really don't work.
The
in principle have a market economy.
Absolutely.
But this cartelization blocks it.
That is because, Girish, the government is not doing a good job of regulation. The government's job is to free up and not meddle. You find wherever, the government doesn't want to let go. You look at even such an honest group as the Tatas, under 3 successive governments, CM Ibrahim was the civil aviation minister, followed by Ghulam Nabi Azad and Anand Kumar of the NDA. These guys were not allowed to set up an airline with Tata SIA, and then they said no. This was in the previous avatar. And then later on, they had also they flirted with illegality, as I mentioned in the case of Nira Radia. Why is that? Because the government wants to create a field where ministers can make money. And
Mr.
I would say broken politics is the reason for this.
Mr. Dua, you have been in the hot seat to say, do you agree with this, that the governments don't allow actually the unfettering of the economy which Mohan talks about?
I think only partly that's true. The fact of the matter is you had at one point of time in the 60s and the 70s, when there wasn't a private sector worth its salt in the country, you needed investments to take place in a whole lot of sectors which were unremunerative, which had long gestation periods, etc. There was no way but for the public sector to be developed. The question is, subsequent to it, when in the 90s, etc., when you liberalized and you did have a base to build upon, has our mindset changed? I think by bringing about the delicensing of the sector and preferences for public sector in purchases, etc., going away, at least the framework was created. Thereafter, it's been a case of ministry position has changed with ministers, position has remained somewhere the same with the ministers. The fact is, wherever regulators have been appointed to give an even space to the public sector and the private sector, I think the ministerial role has come down and the private sector has grown considerably.
Okay.
Telecom, electricity being 2 examples.
Okay. Very quickly, all 3 of you. What is it that needs to be done for private sectors to perform? One at the policy government level and another at their own, at the corporates, the industry level only.
I think the issue really in the private sector is to raise their morale and to inspire them. And I continue to say that there are a few things that need to be done where they will be very excited to start moving. And one of them I mentioned already is the lowering of the interest rate. The prime interest rate prime lending rate should not be more than 8%. And in the United States, it is 2.5%. Now, the second thing is for the small industries, the medium industries, the middle class, the new entrepreneurs, when these young people coming from the colleges, you need to abolish income tax because it's a great instrument of harassment.
Okay. Vivian?
I'll give an example.
That seems to be your dream, which may not be fulfilled in the near future.
Girish, the one sector that has raised the profile of India and the self-esteem of Indians is the software sector.
Right.
And this software sector has functioned under the dictum that the economy thrives when the government sleeps.
Right.
What I would say, I'm not asking the government to sleep. We require the government to be in many areas like education, healthcare, and those sectors. But we want the government to do a very efficient job of regulation. We require honest regulators. We require an honest government, which is why...
What about honest corporate?
Which is... There will be honest corporates also. There will be honest corporates if you've got honest government. Otherwise, if you've got dishonest government, you have what has happened in the coal sector and the telecom sector.
Right. Okay. Yes, Mohan, quickly.
I think first you got to clean up the public sector. As Vivian said, that you have to do something drastic there. My suggestion is dealing them from the administrative ministries.
That is public sector.
The public sector is bigger than the private sector.
Right.
Okay. The private sector, you can't reduce interest rates immediately because you're lending, you're borrowing, banks are borrowing at 9% from the public. I get 9.75. How can they lend it at 8%? Are you going to subsidize interest? This is a gradual process. You can't do it in one fell swoop. It's a long-term thing. So right now, they've got to play the game according to the rules. I think they should not be allowed to come to Delhi to negotiate and bargain and get the way out. You shut down a few chaps and make an example. I think government can start by making an example of Indian Airlines and Air India. And then now you're throwing more money for the SpiceJet. Today I'm seeing in the papers that SpiceJet has more. The owners have more money than the SpiceJet requires. But they are coming to the government saying, "You give us more money." You should not do that.
Okay.
And all these people who got bad debts, collect from them, squeeze them, cut their companies down, sell their divisions, and make them profitable again.
Okay. I think on that note, we need to, and it's been a very interesting discussion, how private sector can help in improving the economy, help the economy to grow. But there are a lot of things to be done both at the government level and as well as at the private sector level itself. Thanks to all my guests, Mr. Ajay Dua, Dr. Subramanian Swamy, Vivian Fernandes and Mohan Guruswamy. Please keep watching. We'll come up with another issue on this series about India in 2014.